The desolate sun hung low over the Montana territory as Mackenzie O'Connor dismounted from his weary horse at the edge of Miles City. Dust caked his weathered denim, and the stubble on his jaw hadn't seen a razor in days. The year was 1879, and the promise of new beginnings had drawn him westward from Philadelphia following the war. He'd left behind a life of plenty to find something more authentic in the rugged landscape of the frontier. Now, as he led his chestnut mare toward the livery stable, the crushing weight of loneliness settled more heavily on his shoulders than his saddlebags. "Water first, then rest," he murmured to the horse, running a hand along her sweaty neck. "We both earned it." The main street bustled with the usual afternoon activity: cowboys fresh off the trail looking for whiskey, merchants closing deals, and the occasional respectable woman hurrying along with basket in hand. Mackenzie paid little mind to any of it. 5 years of drifting had taught him to keep to himself, to move through towns like a shadow, taking work where he could find it before moving on. He'd just finished tying his horse to the hitching post when he felt a tug at his sleeve. Looking down, he found himself staring into the desperate eyes of a boy no older than 6 or 7, dirt streaked across his freckled face and clothes hanging loose on his small frame. "Sir, can you help my sister?" the boy asked, his voice trembling with urgency. Mackenzie hesitated. He'd learned the hard way that other people's troubles only led to his own. "What's wrong with your sister, kid?" "She's sick, real sick. Pa died last winter and Ma..." The boy's voice cracked. "Ma went to heaven 2 weeks past. It's just us now, and Tessa can't hardly get out of bed." Something in the boy's earnest face made Mackenzie's resolve waver. "Where is she?" "Our homestead. 'Bout an hour's ride north." The boy pointed vaguely. "I walked all the way here to find help, but nobody'll come. They say we got no money to pay." Mackenzie sighed, glancing up at the sky. Daylight was waning, and he'd planned on a hot meal and a proper bed for the first time in weeks. "What's your name, boy?" "Samuel. Samuel Thompson." The child squared his thin shoulders. "I ain't asking for charity, mister. I can work. I'm strong." Those words, spoken with such desperate dignity from a child too young to bear such burdens, cracked something open inside Mackenzie's chest. He'd been that boy once, making promises he couldn't keep to save someone he loved. "I'm Mackenzie O'Connor," he said finally. "Let me get my horse watered and we'll ride out together." Relief flooded the boy's face. "Thank you, sir, thank you." As Mackenzie lifted Samuel onto his mare, he told himself this was temporary, just a quick ride, maybe some medicine from his saddlebags, and then back to town. He wouldn't get involved beyond that. Couldn't afford to. The boy directed him north along a dusty trail that wound through scrubby pine and rocky outcroppings. Samuel chattered nervously from his perch in front of Mackenzie, telling disjointed stories about his sister, how she could bake the best cornbread in the territory, how she'd been teaching him his letters, how she'd cried at night after their ma died but pretended to be strong during the day. "She's the prettiest girl in Montana," Samuel declared with brotherly pride. "And the smartest, too." Mackenzie made noncommittal sounds of acknowledgement, but with each mile, a growing sense of unease settled in his gut. He'd seen what frontier illness could do without proper care. If the girl was as sick as her brother claimed, they might already be too late. The homestead came into view just as dusk began to settle, a modest cabin with a small barn and corral set against a backdrop of rolling hills. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the stone chimney, the only sign of life. "There it is," Samuel pointed excitedly. "That's home." Mackenzie helped the boy down and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Is there anyone else here, neighbors?" Samuel shook his head. "Nearest farm is 5 miles east. Mr. Peterson comes by sometimes, but not since Ma died." The door creaked as Samuel pushed it open, revealing a tidy but Spartan interior. A cook stove, table with 3 chairs, some shelves with meager provisions, and a curtained-off area that presumably held beds. "Tessa," the boy called. "I brought help, a real cowboy." A weak voice answered from behind the curtain. "Samuel, is that you?" Mackenzie followed as Samuel rushed to pull back the faded fabric. On a narrow bed lay a young woman, her face flushed with fever against the stark white of the pillow. Even in illness, Mackenzie could see what her brother meant. She possessed a delicate beauty that transcended her current state. Her long auburn hair spread around her like autumn leaves, and her eyes, though glazed with fever, were a striking shade of green. "Who's this?" she asked, struggling to sit up. "Mackenzie O'Connor, madam," he said, removing his hat. "Your brother found me in town." "Tessa Thompson," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for the trouble." "Samuel shouldn't have. You need a doctor," Mackenzie interrupted, moving closer to assess her condition. Her skin burned with fever when he gently touched her forehead. "How long have you been like this?" "4 days, maybe 5. She closed her eyes briefly. "Started with chills, then the fever came. I thought I could fight it off." Mackenzie recognized the signs, likely pneumonia or influenza. Without proper care, people died from such illnesses every day on the frontier. "I have some willow bark in my saddlebags," he said. "It'll help with the fever." "Samuel, can you get water boiling?" The boy jumped to action immediately, stoking the cookstove fire with practiced hands that spoke of responsibilities shouldered too young. While Samuel worked, Mackenzie returned to his horse for supplies. His mind raced with calculations and possibilities. Miles City was too far to transport her safely tonight. The doctor might come tomorrow if paid enough, but Mackenzie's funds were limited after months of sparse work. Back inside, he brewed the willow bark tea and helped Tessa drink it, supporting her head with a gentleness that surprised even himself. Her fingers clutched weakly at his arm, burning hot against his skin. "The children," she murmured, delirious. "Who will care for the children?" "Samuel is safe," Mackenzie assured her, though he knew she was confusing present with past, perhaps thinking of her own childhood. "Rest now." As night descended, Mackenzie helped Samuel prepare a simple supper from the meager stores in the cabin. The boy worked with solemn efficiency, explaining that Tessa had taught him to cook when their mother first fell ill. "Pa was a trapper," Samuel said, stirring a pot of beans. "He went out last winter and never came back. Ma said a storm must have caught him. And your mother?" Mackenzie asked quietly. "Consumption," Samuel replied with the terrible matter-of-factness of a child who has seen too much suffering. "Same as half the county," Tessa says. After they ate, Mackenzie checked on Tessa again. Her fever hadn't broken, but she slept more peacefully. He changed the cool cloth on her forehead and found himself studying her face in the lantern light, the delicate curve of her cheekbones, the small scar above her right eyebrow, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. This was a woman who had fought hard for everything she had. "Will she die like Ma did?" Samuel asked from behind him, his voice small. Mackenzie turned to find the boy clutching a ragged quilt to his chest. "No," he said with more certainty than he felt. "Not if I can help it." That night, Mackenzie slept in a chair by Tessa's bedside, waking every hour to check her fever and give her water. By morning, he had made his decision. He couldn't leave them here alone. "Samuel," he said over a breakfast of cornmeal mush, "I'm going to ride into town for medicine." "I'll be back by midday. Can you keep watching over your sister?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I've been doing it already." "Good man," Mackenzie said, surprising himself with the warmth in his voice. "Keep cool cloths on her forehead and make sure she drinks water whenever she wakes." The ride to Miles City felt longer than it had the previous day, weighted as Mackenzie was with newfound responsibility. At the general store, he purchased quinine, more willow bark, and food supplies that would last several days. At the saloon, he inquired about the doctor. "Doc Matthews is over in Billings until Friday," the barkeep informed him. "Something about a difficult birthing." Mackenzie cursed under his breath. "Anyone else around here with medical knowledge, Mrs. Holloway sometimes helps with the doctoring," offered a man nursing a whiskey despite the early hour. "Lives at the edge of town, yellow house with the white fence, Mrs. Holloway, a stern-faced widow with capable hands, listened to Mackenzie's description of Tessa's symptoms and packed a basket with tinctures and herbs. "Sounds like influenza to me," she said, wrapping a bottle of dark liquid. "This will help with the cough when it comes, and it will come. Keep her warm, keep her drinking. If the fever breaks and comes back, that's when you need to worry." "Will you come see her?" Mackenzie asked. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. Too many sick here in town already. Spring fevers are making their rounds. She studied his face. You're not kin to these children, are you? No, madam. Then why are you helping them? Most men would have pointed the boy toward the church and kept riding. Mackenzie didn't have an answer that made sense even to himself. Someone has to, he finally said. The woman's expression softened slightly. Well, come back if she worsens, and tell her to brew this tea 3 times daily. She handed him a small bundle of dried leaves. It'll strengthen her blood. By the time Mackenzie returned to the homestead, the sun had climbed high overhead. He found Samuel sitting vigilantly by his sister's bed, reading aloud from a tattered copy of Robinson Crusoe. How is she? Mackenzie asked, setting down his purchases. She woke up twice, Samuel reported, drank some water and asked for you. Something warmed in Mackenzie's chest at those words. She asked for me, said to thank the kind cowboy when he returned. Samuel dog-eared the page in his book. Are you staying? The question hung in the air. Mackenzie had planned to leave once he'd brought back supplies and instructions, to continue his journey to wherever the trail might lead. He had no obligations here, no reason to linger. And yet, as he looked at Samuel's hopeful face and then at Tessa's feverish form, he knew he couldn't ride away. Not yet, for a while, he answered. Until your sister's better. That afternoon, Mackenzie set about making himself useful around the homestead. He chopped firewood, repaired a broken hinge on the barn door, and discovered a small vegetable garden in desperate need of tending. Samuel followed him like a shadow, eager to help and even more eager to talk. Pa was teaching me to trap before he died, the boy said, handing Mackenzie nails as he fixed the chicken coop. Tessa says I'm too young, but I ain't. I could help put food on the table if she'd let me. Your sister's just trying to protect you, Mackenzie said. Trapping's dangerous work, especially alone. Is that what you do, trapping? Mackenzie shook his head. I've done a bit of everything, cowboying mostly, some mining, carpentry when I can find it. Why do you move around so much? The question, innocent as it was, struck a nerve. Mackenzie considered giving the boy a simplified answer but found himself speaking truthfully instead. After the war, I couldn't settle, felt like I didn't belong anywhere anymore. You were in the war. Samuel's eyes widened with childish awe. Did you shoot anyone? That's not something to admire, Samuel, Mackenzie said firmly. War isn't an adventure from your books. Real men died, good men on both sides. Samuel looked suitably chastened. Tessa says the same thing when I ask about Pa's hunting rifle. Inside the cabin, Tessa stirred when Mackenzie brought her more medicine. Her fever seemed marginally lower, though her breathing remained labored. You're still here, she murmured as he helped her sip the bitter quinine mixture. Said I would be, Mackenzie replied. Her eyes, clearer now than they had been the previous night, studied his face. Why, you don't know us. It was the same question Mrs. Holloway had asked, the same one he'd been asking himself. Your brother is persuasive, he said with a slight smile, and I couldn't leave you two alone out here. We've been alone since Pa died, she said, a flash of pride cutting through her weakness. We would have managed. I'm sure you would have, Mackenzie agreed, respecting her dignity, but sometimes even the strongest people need help. She didn't argue further, perhaps because she lacked the strength, or perhaps because she recognized the truth in his words. After she drifted back to sleep, Mackenzie found Samuel outside, attempting to mend a torn shirt with clumsy stitches. Tessa always does the sewing, the boy explained, frustrated, but her hands shake too much now. Mackenzie sat beside him on the porch step. Here, let me. At Samuel's surprised look, he shrugged. When you live alone on the trail, you learn to fix your own clothes or go naked. The boy giggled at that, handing over the needle and thread. Mackenzie's stitches weren't pretty, but they were functional, closing the tear with practiced efficiency. You're good at lots of things, Samuel observed, like Pa was. The comparison unsettled Mackenzie, creating an expectation he wasn't sure he could or should fulfill. Your Pa was a special man, I'm sure. I'm just passing through. But even as he said the words, Mackenzie wondered if they were still true. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm. Mackenzie would rise at dawn, tend to his horse and the few livestock that remained on the homestead, then prepare breakfast for Samuel before checking on Tessa. Her condition improved gradually, the fever lessening, her periods of lucidity lengthening. By the fourth day, she was able to sit up and take broth that Mackenzie had made from a rabbit he'd snared. "This is good," she said, sounding surprised as she sipped from the wooden spoon he held. "Don't sound so shocked," he teased. "I've been feeding myself for years." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Samuel said you've been everywhere, that you fought in the war and trapped with mountain men and drove cattle up from Texas." Mackenzie raised an eyebrow. "Did he now? Seems I've lived quite the adventurous life." "He exaggerates," Tessa admitted. "Gets it from our father. He never met a story he couldn't improve with embellishment." "Some of it's true enough," Mackenzie said. "I was at Gettysburg, though I was just a boy of 17, and I did drive cattle once from Texas to Kansas." "Worst job I ever had. Dust in your teeth for weeks and the constant fear of stampede." Tessa studied him with interest. "You speak differently than most men who come through here, more educated." "My mother was a schoolteacher," he explained. "Never let me forget my grammar, even after we lost everything in the war," she nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The war changed everything for so many. My father came west after Appomattox, said he couldn't stand to look at burned fields anymore." The shared understanding created a moment of connection between them, a recognition of similar losses despite their different paths. "You should rest more," Mackenzie said, taking the empty bowl. "Your fever's down, but you're still weak." "I've been in this bed too long already," she protested. "The garden needs tending, the chickens need feeding, Samuel and I have it handled," he assured her. "The boy's a hard worker." Pride softened her features. "He is, too much so sometimes. I worry he's missing his childhood, taking on so many responsibilities." "Children are resilient," Mackenzie said, "but they need stability." He hesitated before adding, "What will you do now? 2 people alone on a homestead this size." The question clearly troubled her. "I don't know," she admitted. "Before I fell ill, I was considering selling, maybe moving to town. I could take in washing, perhaps find work as a seamstress." Her hands twisted in the blanket. "But this was our parents' dream. Leaving feels like failing them." "Your parents wouldn't want you struggling just to hold on to land," Mackenzie said gently. "They'd want you and Samuel safe." Tears welled in her eyes, and she turned away. "You don't know what they'd want." "No," he agreed. "I don't. I'm sorry." He left her then, understanding she needed privacy for her grief. Outside, he found Samuel attempting to repair a broken wheel on the old wagon. "Is Tessa mad?" the boy asked immediately. "I heard her voice get all tight like it does when she's upset." "Not mad," Mackenzie assured him. "Just tired and worried. It's a lot for her to handle." Samuel abandoned the wheel to sit beside Mackenzie on a stump. "Are you leaving soon?" he asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the worry in his voice. The question hit Mackenzie harder than expected. He should be leaving. His drifter's instincts told him he'd already stayed too long, involved himself too deeply. And yet, the thought of riding away from this homestead, from these 2 people who had somehow wormed their way into his carefully guarded heart, caused a physical ache in his chest. "Not right away," he answered carefully. "Your sister still needs help." Samuel's relief was palpable. "Good. Tessa smiles more since you came, even when she's sick." Before Mackenzie could process that information, a distant sound caught his attention, the rumble of approaching horses. He stood, instantly alert, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Expecting visitors?" he asked Samuel. The boy shook his head, eyes wide with sudden fear. "No one comes here." "Get inside," Mackenzie ordered. "Lock the door and stay with your sister. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." Samuel ran for the cabin while Mackenzie positioned himself between the approaching riders and the house. 3 men appeared over the rise, riding hard toward the homestead. None looked familiar, and all wore the dust of the trail. Mackenzie's instincts, honed by years of survival, screamed danger. The men reined in their horses a few yards away, sizing him up with calculating eyes. "Afternoon," the lead rider called, a heavy-set man with a graying beard and cold eyes. "We're looking for Jacob Thompson's place." "This is Thompson land," Mackenzie confirmed cautiously. "What's your business here?" The 3 men exchanged glances. "Family business," the leader replied. I'm Harold Thompson, Jacob's brother. These are my sons, Illy and John. We heard about Eliza's passing and came to pay our respects. Mackenzie didn't lower his guard. Something felt wrong about their arrival. That's mighty considerate, coming all this way for family you've never mentioned before. Harold's expression hardened. And who might you be to know what family's been mentioned or not? Friend of the family, Mackenzie replied evenly, helping out while Miss Thompson recovers from illness. The man dismounted, his sons following suit. Well, now that we're here, we can take over. Blood looks after blood, after all. Through the cabin window, Mackenzie caught a glimpse of Tessa's pale face, her expression a mixture of shock and fear as she peered out at the newcomers. Whatever relationship these men had to the Thompsons, it clearly wasn't a welcome one. Miss Thompson is resting, Mackenzie said firmly. Perhaps you should come back tomorrow. Harold's hand drifted toward his gun. Perhaps you should mind your own business, friend. This is Thompson land and we're Thompsons. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring drawn too tight. Mackenzie had been in enough confrontations to recognize when violence hung in the air, waiting only for the slightest provocation. The cabin door creaked open, and Tessa emerged, leaning heavily against the doorframe. She wore a faded blue dress that hung loosely on her fever-thinned frame, her hair hastily pinned up. "Uncle Harold," she acknowledged, her voice steady despite her obvious weakness. "It's been 7 years since we've seen you. Strange that you'd remember us now." The older man's face twisted into what might have been intended as a sympathetic smile, but looked more like a grimace. "Terrible news about your parents, girl. We came as soon as word reached us in Wyoming." "Mother died 2 weeks ago," Tessa replied coldly. "Father last winter." "Your concern seems delayed," Harold shrugged, unperturbed by her hostility. "News travels slow, but we're here now and family needs to stick together. You and the boy can't manage this place alone." "We're managing fine," Tessa insisted, though she swayed slightly with the effort of standing. Mackenzie moved subtly closer to her, ready to provide support if needed. He'd encountered men like Harold Thompson before, opportunists who used family ties as a means to what they wanted. The sudden appearance of long, absent relatives immediately after both parents had died suggested motives beyond familial concern. "The land is ours," Tessa continued. "Father's name is on the deed and it passes to his children." Harold's pretense of friendliness slipped further. "A woman and a child can't work a homestead. The bank will foreclose by winter. We're offering you a solution. We'll take over the land, give you enough to start fresh in town." "And if we refuse?" Tessa challenged. The older Thompson spread his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. "Why would you? It's the sensible thing unless your friend here has other ideas." He cast a suspicious glance at Mackenzie. "Mr. O'Connor has been kind enough to help during my illness," Tessa said. "My decisions are my own." "Well then," Harold persisted, "what is your decision?" "We've ridden a long way and I'd like to settle this matter today." Tessa straightened, summoning dignity despite her weakness. "I need time to consider what's best for Samuel and me. Return tomorrow and we'll discuss terms." The three men exchanged glances, clearly displeased with the delay but finding no reasonable grounds to object. "Tomorrow then," Harold agreed reluctantly. "But don't overthink this, girl. It's the only sensible option." After the Thompsons had ridden away, Mackenzie helped Tessa back inside. She collapsed into a chair, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "You should be in bed," he chided gently. "I couldn't let you face them alone," she said. "Uncle Harold is difficult." "Is he really your father's brother?" Mackenzie asked. Tessa nodded. "They had a falling out years ago before we left Missouri, something about land their father left them." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I never thought he'd show up here." "He wants the homestead," Mackenzie stated flatly, "and I'm guessing he won't offer a fair price." "The land is all we have left," Tessa said quietly. "It's Samuel's inheritance." Samuel emerged from the back room, his young face creased with worry. "I don't like Uncle Harold," he declared. "He was mean to Pa the last time he visited. They shouted." Tessa reached for her brother's hand. "I know, but he's gone now." "Until tomorrow," Mackenzie reminded her. "You need to decide what you want to do." She looked up at him, vulnerability clear in her green eyes. What would you do? The question caught him off guard. He wasn't used to being asked for advice, especially about matters as important as someone's home and future. I can't answer that for you, he said carefully, but I know men like your uncle. They take what they want and call it helping. Will you stay? Samuel blurted out. When they come back tomorrow, the question hung in the air between them. Mackenzie glanced at Tessa, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. If you want me to, he said finally. She nodded, relief visible in the slight loosening of her shoulders. I do. That night, after Samuel had gone to bed, Mackenzie and Tessa sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. She was stronger now, able to stay up for longer periods, though still pale and thin from her illness. Tell me about your uncle, Mackenzie prompted. What kind of man is he? Tessa's fingers traced the grain of the wooden tabletop as she gathered her thoughts. Greedy, opportunistic. Father always said Uncle Harold never saw a dollar he didn't covet or a shortcut he wouldn't take. She sighed. He and Father were close once, worked the same land in Missouri. Then their father died, left the farm to both of them. Harold wanted to sell to a railroad company offering good money. Father refused. It was our family legacy, meant to pass to the next generation. What happened? Harold tried to sell anyway, forged Father's signature on papers. When Father found out, there was a fight, a bad one. Harold left with a broken nose, and Father packed us up and headed west. She shook her head at the memory. I was 12 then, never thought I'd see Uncle Harold again. And now he's here wanting your land, Mackenzie observed. The irony isn't lost on me, Tessa said with a bitter smile. Father died defending his right to keep family land, and now Harold thinks he can just take it from us. Does he have any legal claim? Mackenzie asked. None. Father made sure the deed was clear. The homestead belongs to his heirs, Samuel and me. She rubbed her temples. But he's not wrong that it's difficult for us to manage alone. Even before I got sick, we were struggling. Mackenzie hesitated before speaking his next thought. There's another option, one your uncle didn't mention. She looked up questioningly. You could take on a partner, he suggested. Someone to work the land, share the burden and the profits. A partner, Tessa repeated. Who would partner with a woman and a child on a struggling homestead? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities neither was ready to voice. Mackenzie had never intended to stay in one place, had never imagined himself settling down. And yet, the thought had formed in his mind unbidden. What if he stayed? Not just for a few days or weeks, but permanently. It's something to consider, he said finally, not quite answering her question. Better than selling to a man like Harold Thompson. Tessa studied his face in the lamplight. Why are you helping us, Mackenzie, truly? The directness of her question demanded honesty. At first, it was for Samuel. He reminded me of myself at that age, taking on responsibilities too big for his shoulders. He paused, then added more quietly, now I'm not sure. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I needed to be needed. His candor seemed to surprise her. She reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of connection that sent warmth through him. Well, we do need you, more than I'd like to admit. The moment stretched between them, comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibility. Finally, Tessa rose, steadying herself against the table. Tomorrow will be difficult, she said. We should rest. Mackenzie nodded, watching as she made her way to the curtained bedroom area where Samuel already slept. Good night, Tessa. She paused, glancing back at him with the ghost of a smile. Good night, Mackenzie. Morning brought clear skies and a sense of tense anticipation. Mackenzie rose early to complete the daily chores, his mind turning over strategies for the coming confrontation. He had no legal standing in this dispute, but he wouldn't stand aside if Harold Thompson tried to intimidate Tessa and Samuel. Tessa joined him outside as he split firewood, looking stronger than she had the previous day. She dressed carefully in her best dress, her hair neatly braided and pinned, as if armor against the coming battle. You look better, he observed. I feel better. She picked up the split logs, stacking them neatly against the cabin, strong enough to face Uncle Harold at least. Mackenzie set down his axe. You've decided what to tell him, she nodded, determination hardening her delicate features. I'm not selling, not to him, not to anyone. This is our home, our future. She took a deep breath, but I am considering your suggestion about a partner." Before Mackenzie could respond, Samuel came running from the barn. "Riders coming, 3 of them," Tessa smoothed her dress, squaring her shoulders. "Let's get this over with." The Thompson men arrived with the same aggressive confidence they'd displayed the previous day, dismounting without waiting for invitation. Harold's gaze took in the neatly stacked firewood, the repaired barn door, and other signs of Mackenzie's labor with obvious displeasure. "You're looking better, niece," he said to Tessa. "Strong enough to think clearly about our offer, I hope." "I've thought very clearly, uncle," Tessa replied, "and I'm not selling." Harold's face darkened. "Don't be foolish, girl. What do you know about running a homestead? Your father could barely keep it going, and he was a strong man." "She said she's not selling," Mackenzie interjected. "That should end the discussion." The older Thompson turned his cold gaze on Mackenzie. "This isn't your concern, stranger. This is family business." "Mr. O'Connor speaks with my authority," Tessa said firmly, "and my decision is final. The land stays with us." Harold stepped closer, his manner increasingly threatening. "Think about the boy, if not yourself. What kind of life can you give him here? Poverty, isolation, endless work for little reward. Better than being under your thumb," Tessa shot back. "Father told me enough about your character to know any arrangement with you would end badly for us." The pretense of family concern dropped entirely from Harold's expression. "You've got your father's stubbornness and your mother's foolishness. Fine, keep your worthless acres, but when winter comes and you're starving, don't come crawling to me." "We won't," Tessa assured him. For a moment, it seemed the confrontation might end there. Then Harold's younger son, Ellie, spoke up. "Pa, we didn't ride all this way to leave empty-handed." A dangerous look passed between father and sons. Mackenzie subtly shifted his position, placing himself between the Thompson men and Tessa. "Maybe we should just take what's ours," the older son, John, suggested. "Jacob stole our father's inheritance. We're just collecting what's due." Harold seemed to consider this, his hand moving toward his gun. 3 against 1, stranger. "Bad odds, even for a man who looks like he can handle himself." 4 against 3, came Samuel's voice as the boy emerged from the cabin, his father's old rifle clutched in his small hands. The weapon was almost as tall as he was, and he clearly didn't know how to use it properly, but his determined stance was unmistakable. "Samuel, go back inside," Tessa ordered, fear evident in her voice. "No," the boy said stubbornly. "I'm not hiding while they threaten you and Mackenzie." Harold laughed coldly. "Look at that, the runt thinks he's a man. Put down that gun before you hurt yourself, boy." Samuel's hands trembled, but he didn't lower the rifle. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Mackenzie knew that violence now would only end badly, possibly for all of them. "There doesn't need to be trouble," he said evenly. "Miss Thompson has made her decision. The honorable thing would be to respect it and leave peacefully." "Honor," Harold scoffed. "You think this is about honor?" "It's about what's owed, what's right." "What's right is that you leave our land," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the dangerous situation. Now, something in her certainty seemed to give Harold pause. He glanced between Tessa's resolute face, Samuel's trembling determination, and Mackenzie's watchful stance. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Land like this, 2 people can't hold it. There'll come a time when you need to sell, and I'll be waiting." He jerked his head at his sons. "Mount up." The 3 men backed toward their horses, keeping wary eyes on Mackenzie and Samuel's rifle. As they mounted, Harold called out one final threat. "Winter's coming, girl, remember that." They watched in tense silence as the Thompson men rode away, dust rising behind their horses. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did Tessa rush to Samuel, taking the rifle from his shaking hands. "Don't ever do that again," she scolded, though her voice quavered with relief rather than anger. "You could have been hurt." "They were going to hurt you and Mackenzie," Samuel protested. "I had to do something." Tessa pulled her brother into a fierce hug. "You brave, foolish boy." Over Samuel's shoulder, her eyes met Mackenzie's, filled with gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you," she mouthed silently. Mackenzie nodded, but his expression remained grave. "They'll be back," he said once Tessa had released Samuel. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but men like that don't give up easily. I know, Tessa acknowledged, but what choice do we have? This land is all we have left. The question hung between them, bringing them back to their unfinished conversation from the previous night. Mackenzie knew he stood at a crossroads, continue his life of drifting or commit to something, someone permanent. I meant what I said last night, he said carefully, about a partnership. Tessa sent Samuel to check on the chickens, ensuring privacy for their conversation. Are you offering to be that partner, Mackenzie? She asked directly. He met her gaze steadily. I am. I know how to work land, how to handle livestock. I'm good with my hands and I'm not afraid of hard work. He paused, then added, but I want to be clear, this would be a business arrangement. You and Samuel would keep ownership of the land. I'd provide labor and experience in exchange for a share of whatever we produce. Something like disappointment flickered across Tessa's face before she masked it. A business arrangement, she repeated. Yes, that makes sense, very practical. Mackenzie felt as though he'd somehow misstepped but wasn't sure how. Is that acceptable to you? It is, she agreed, her tone professional. We can work out the details later. For now, knowing you'll stay is reassuring. With that, she turned and walked back toward the cabin, her posture straight despite her lingering weakness. Mackenzie watched her go, feeling that something important had just transpired, though he couldn't quite grasp what. Over the following weeks, Tessa regained her strength while Mackenzie threw himself into improving the homestead. He repaired the roof before the autumn rains came, reinforced the barn, and plotted with Tessa about which crops might yield best come spring. Samuel thrived under the shared attention, his natural exuberance returning as the burden of adult responsibilities eased from his young shoulders. They settled into a rhythm of shared meals, shared work, and quiet evenings by the fire. Mackenzie taught Samuel how to properly clean and maintain his father's rifle, emphasizing safety and responsibility. Tessa resumed teaching her brother his letters and numbers, now including stories of history and geography that Mackenzie would supplement with tales from his travels. As autumn deepened toward winter, Mackenzie rode into Miles City for supplies, returning with seeds for spring planting, tools, and to Samuel's delight a small stack of books. Robinson Crusoe gets tiresome after the 10th reading, Mackenzie explained as the boy eagerly examined the volumes. Thought we could use some variety for the winter evenings. Thank you, Tessa said softly when Samuel had run off to show his treasures to the barn cat, for remembering that he's still a child who needs wonder, not just a worker. He reminds me every day, Mackenzie replied with a smile. Hard to forget when he's asking 100 questions about river pirates and buffalo hunters. Their partnership had evolved into something comfortable yet complex. Mackenzie had built a small cabin for himself behind the main house, insisting on separate quarters to maintain propriety, but spent most waking hours with Tessa and Samuel. They worked side by side, planned together, made decisions as a unit. Yet always, Mackenzie maintained a careful distance, reminding himself that their arrangement was practical, not personal. If Tessa sometimes looked at him with something more than partnership in her eyes, if his hand sometimes lingered when passing her tools or helping her from the wagon, neither acknowledged it aloud. The first snow fell in late November, blanketing the homestead in pristine white. Samuel ran outside at dawn, shouting with delight as he kicked up powdery drifts. Mackenzie joined him, showing him how to pack perfect snowballs that they launched at fence posts until their hands grew numb with cold. From the cabin doorway, Tessa watched them, wrapped in a shawl against the chill, her face soft with an emotion Mackenzie couldn't name, but that made his heart stumble in his chest. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Samuel fell asleep with his head in Tessa's lap, exhausted from the day's snow adventures. She stroked his hair absently, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames. He's happy, she said softly. Happier than I've seen him since before Father died. Mackenzie nodded, watching the firelight play across her features. He deserves that happiness, you both do. So do you, she replied, meeting his eyes. Are you happy here, Mackenzie, truly, or do you still feel the pull of the open road? The question struck at the heart of what he'd been avoiding confronting. "I am happy," he admitted, "happier than I expected to be settling in one place." "But," she prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation. He sighed, searching for the right words. "But I worry that I'm intruding on what should be your family's life. That Samuel is becoming too attached to someone who isn't his father. That you," he stopped, unsure how to express his deepest concern, "that I'm becoming too attached as well." Tessa finished for him, her directness catching him off guard. Mackenzie met her steady gaze. "Yes." She looked down at her sleeping brother, then back to Mackenzie. "Would that be so terrible?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Mackenzie had spent years avoiding attachment, convinced that the less he cared, the less he could be hurt. Now, faced with Tessa's quiet courage, his carefully constructed defenses felt paper-thin. "No," he said finally, his voice low, "it wouldn't be terrible at all." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day when a desperate boy had tugged at his sleeve in Miles City. Samuel stirred in his sleep, breaking the moment. Tessa smiled softly, returning her attention to her brother. "I should get him to bed." Mackenzie nodded, rising to help. Together, they carried the sleeping boy to the small bedroom he shared with his sister, tucking him beneath quilts and furs against the winter cold. In the doorway, they paused, standing close enough that Mackenzie could smell the lavender she used to scent her soap. He reached out, tentatively brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Good night, Tessa," he murmured. She caught his hand before he could withdraw it, holding it against her cheek for a moment. "Good night, Mackenzie." The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that sometimes confined them to the homestead for days at a time. They passed the hours with reading, mending, and Samuel's endless games. Mackenzie taught the boy chess, using pieces he'd carved from scraps of wood, while Tessa worked on a quilt made from salvaged fabric. In December, as Christmas approached, Mackenzie rode into Miles City despite threatening skies, returning with small gifts. Candy for Samuel, a length of pretty blue ribbon for Tessa, and supplies for a proper Christmas dinner. They decorated the cabin with pine boughs and berries, and Tessa baked cookies using precious sugar she'd been saving for a special occasion. On Christmas Eve, after Samuel had finally fallen asleep, vibrating with excitement for the morning, Tessa and Mackenzie sat by the fire, sharing a rare moment alone. "I have something for you," she said, reaching behind her chair to retrieve a package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much." Mackenzie unwrapped it carefully to find a knitted scarf in deep blue wool. "When did you make this?" he asked, running his fingers over the even stitches. "During the evenings after you'd gone to your cabin," she admitted. "I wanted it to be a surprise." He wrapped the scarf around his neck, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, thank you." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I have something for you too." The small wooden box he handed her opened to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was simple but beautiful, clearly chosen with care. "Mackenzie," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "It's lovely." "Open it," he urged. Inside, she found a tiny portrait of Samuel, smiling his gap-toothed smile. "How did you—" "There's a photographer who set up shop in Miles City," he explained. "I took Samuel there last month when we went for supplies. He kept the secret admirably well." Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked from the locket to Mackenzie. "Help me put it on." She turned, lifting her hair so he could fasten the chain around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending a current of awareness through them both. When she turned back, they were closer than before, the locket resting just above her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For this and for everything else, for staying." Something in her eyes, in the softness of her voice, broke through Mackenzie's final reservations. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Tessa responded, her hands coming up to rest on his shoulders. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily, eyes wide with the significance of what had just happened. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Mackenzie confessed. "I've wanted you to," she replied with a small smile. He took her hands in his, suddenly serious. Tessa, I need you to understand something. When I suggested this partnership, I meant it as a practical arrangement because I didn't want to presume. I didn't dare hope for more. He paused, gathering his courage. But my feelings for you, for Samuel, they're far beyond practical. You've become my family, the home I never thought I'd find again. Tessa's eyes shone with emotion. And you've become ours. Samuel adores you, and she took a deep breath. I love you, Mackenzie. I think I have since you first rode up to our cabin, determined to help a sick stranger because a little boy asked you to. He kissed her again, joy expanding in his chest until he thought it might burst. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, both of you. More than I thought possible. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, blanketing the world in hushed white. Inside, wrapped in newfound love and the promise of a future together, Mackenzie and Tessa sat by the fire, planning the life they would build. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright. Samuel burst into the main room at first light, vibrating with excitement that only intensified when he discovered the small carved horse Mackenzie had made for him and the candy in his stocking. His joy filled the cabin as they shared a breakfast of special Christmas pancakes with preserved berries. Watching Samuel exclaim over his gifts, Mackenzie felt a contentment he'd never known before. Tessa caught his eye across the table, her hand touching the locket at her throat, and smiled a private smile that promised more conversations, more kisses, more future than he'd ever dared imagine. Later that day, as they enjoyed their Christmas dinner, Samuel looked up from his plate with a thoughtful expression. Mackenzie, are you going to marry Tessa? The directness of the question made Mackenzie choke on his coffee while Tessa turned scarlet. Samuel, she admonished. That's not an appropriate question. The boy looked unrepentant. Why not? I saw you kissing by the fire last night when you thought I was asleep. He turned back to Mackenzie, persistent. So are you, because if you are, that means you'd be my brother, right? Or would you be like a pa? Mackenzie set down his cup, meeting Samuel's earnest gaze. Then he looked at Tessa, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She gave a small nod, her eyes soft with emotion. Well, Samuel, Mackenzie said carefully, I haven't asked your sister yet. That's something a man should do properly, with a ring and perhaps permission from the lady's family. He smiled. Which I suppose would be you. Samuel's face lit up. You have my permission. Can I watch when you ask her? Tessa laughed despite her embarrassment. Samuel Thompson, you are impossible. Actually, Mackenzie said, suddenly serious as he reached across the table for Tessa's hand, maybe now is the perfect time. He took a deep breath. I don't have a ring yet, and this isn't how I planned it, but… Tessa Thompson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Tears welled in Tessa's eyes as she squeezed his hand. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. Samuel whooped with delight, jumping from his chair to hug them both. I knew it. We're going to be a real family. We already are, Mackenzie told him, ruffling his hair. The ring and the ceremony just make it official. That night, after Samuel had finally succumbed to sleep, Mackenzie and Tessa sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, watching stars glitter in the crystal-clear winter sky. Are you sure about this? Tessa asked softly. Marriage, settling down permanently, it's a far cry from the life you've led. Mackenzie tightened his arm around her shoulders. I've never been more certain of anything, he assured her. I spent years running from the past, never staying anywhere long enough to build a future. Now I know why I was waiting to find you and Samuel, though I didn't realize it. She rested her head on his shoulder, content. When should we marry? Spring, he suggested. When the snow melts and the world turns green again, we can plant our first crops as husband and wife. He paused, then added, if that's not too long to wait. Spring is perfect, she agreed. It gives us time to prepare and for the weather to clear enough for people to travel. I'd like Mrs. Holloway to come and perhaps Reverend Jenkins from town. They sat in comfortable silence, planning their future together, until the cold drove them back inside. Mackenzie kissed her goodnight at her door, then made his way to his small cabin, his heart lighter than it had been in years. January brought fierce storms that isolated the homestead for days at a time. Mackenzie spent the hours of enforced idleness working on improvements to the interior of the main cabin, building new shelves, repairing furniture, and crafting a proper bed frame to replace the simple platform Tessa had been using. For Samuel, he created a desk where the boy could practice his letters and do the lessons Tessa set for him. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, reading from the books Mackenzie had brought or simply talking. Samuel never seemed to tire of hearing stories of Mackenzie's travels, though Tessa sometimes worried that the tales would give her brother wanderlust. "Don't worry," Mackenzie assured her. "The stories satisfy his curiosity. Besides, I always end by explaining how much better it is to have a home to return to." February arrived with brutal cold but increasing signs that winter would eventually release its grip. Mackenzie began preparations for spring planting, studying the land and discussing crop rotation with Tessa. Together, they developed plans for expanding the garden and perhaps adding wheat to their plantings. "With 3 of us working," Tessa observed, "we can accomplish so much more than my father ever managed alone." "Next year will be even better," Mackenzie promised. "And the year after that, better still." The ease with which he spoke of their shared future warmed Tessa more than the fire. She leaned against him, contentment washing over her. "I never imagined this," she admitted. "After Mother died, I thought Samuel and I would struggle alone until we were forced to sell. Now I see possibilities stretching out for years." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "That's what hope does. It lets you see beyond the immediate struggle to what might be." In March, as the snow began to melt and the first hints of green appeared in protected hollows, Mackenzie rode into Miles City for supplies. He returned with seeds for planting, new tools, and tucked safely in his pocket a ring for Tessa. He'd saved carefully over the winter months, setting aside a portion of the money he'd brought with him and adding to it by selling pelts from animals he'd trapped. The ring wasn't elaborate, a simple gold band with a small pearl, but he'd chosen it with care, knowing Tessa would appreciate its elegance and practicality. That evening, after Samuel had gone to bed, Mackenzie presented it to her properly, kneeling before her chair by the fire. "I know we're already engaged," he said, holding out the ring, "but I wanted to do this right." Tears sparkled in Tessa's eyes as she extended her hand, allowing him to slip the ring onto her finger. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Perfect?" "Like you," he replied, rising to kiss her. The weeks leading up to their wedding passed in a flurry of preparation. As the weather improved, Mackenzie made several trips to Miles City, bringing back fabric for Tessa to make a wedding dress, special foods for the celebration, and even paint to freshen the cabin's exterior. Word of their impending marriage spread, bringing visitors from neighboring homesteads, people Tessa had known but rarely seen during the difficult months following her parents' deaths. They came bearing congratulations and offers of help, re-establishing connections that had frayed but not broken. "Your father was well respected," Mrs. Peterson told Tessa as she helped prepare food for the wedding feast. "People wanted to help after he passed, but you kept to yourselves so much, they didn't know how to approach." "I was too proud," Tessa admitted. "Too determined to prove we could manage alone." "And now?" the older woman asked with a knowing smile. Tessa glanced out the window to where Mackenzie was showing Samuel how to repair a fence. "Now I understand that accepting help isn't weakness, it's how communities survive out here." April brought warming temperatures and the first substantial plantings in the expanded garden. Mackenzie and Tessa worked side by side, her knowledge of what had grown well in previous years complementing his broader agricultural experience. Samuel helped too, proudly responsible for the row of carrots he'd planted himself. As their wedding day approached, Mackenzie found himself increasingly reflective. One evening, as he and Tessa sat on the porch watching the sunset, he voiced the thought that had been circling his mind. "It's strange to think how close I came to missing all this," he said. "If I'd ignored Samuel that day in town, or if I'd left once you started recovering." "But you didn't," Tessa pointed out, squeezing his hand. "You stayed. For the first time in my life," he acknowledged. "And I'll never regret it." Their wedding day dawned clear and mild, perfect spring weather that seemed an auspicious beginning. They married in front of the cabin, surrounded by neighbors and the few friends they'd made in Miles City. Samuel stood proudly beside them, beaming as Reverend Jenkins pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful good food, music from a neighbor's fiddle, and the warm fellowship of a community coming together. As evening approached, their guests departed with well wishes, leaving the newly formed family to their first night together. Samuel, exhausted from excitement and unaccustomed social interaction, fell asleep almost immediately after the last guest left. Mackenzie carried him to his bed, tucking him in with a tenderness that made Tessa's heart swell. "He's had quite a day," Mackenzie observed as they stood watching the sleeping boy. "We all have," Tessa replied, taking his hand. "Husband," the word sent a thrill through Mackenzie. "Wife," he responded, drawing her close. Later, in the privacy of what was now their bedroom, Mackenzie held Tessa close, marveling at the journey that had brought them together. "Did you ever think," he asked softly, "when Samuel found me in town that it would lead to this?" She shook her head, her hair spilling across his chest. "I was too sick to think beyond the next hour, and then, when I began to recover, I was too afraid to hope. And now," he prompted, she raised herself up to look into his eyes. "Now I believe in miracles, in second chances. In love that finds you when you least expect it." Mackenzie drew her down for a kiss, pouring into it all the love and gratitude he felt. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a drifter," he promised. "I already know I won't," she assured him. "You're home now, Mackenzie. We all are." Spring blossomed into summer, bringing long days of work punctuated by moments of pure joy. Their first crops thrived under careful tending, and Mackenzie added 3 milk cows and a dozen chickens to their livestock, ensuring a steady supply of dairy and eggs. Samuel flourished too, growing inches seemingly overnight and developing a passion for the natural world around them. Mackenzie taught him to fish in the creek that ran along the eastern boundary of their property, and Tessa encouraged his interest in identifying plants and their uses. In July, they received unexpected visitors, a U.S. Marshal and his deputy, tracking a group of cattle rustlers believed to be operating in the area. "We're checking with all the homesteads," Marshal Davis explained over coffee at their kitchen table. "These men are dangerous, already killed 2 ranchers who caught them in the act. Best keep your family close to home until we apprehend them." Mackenzie nodded, concern evident in his expression. "Any description of these men, 3 of them from what witnesses say, leader's a heavy-set man with a gray beard, goes by the name Thompson or Thompson, though that's likely false." Tessa's hand found Mackenzie's under the table, squeezing tightly. After the marshal left, they shared their suspicion that Harold Thompson and his sons had turned to outlawry. "It fits," Mackenzie said grimly. "They weren't the type to accept defeat gracefully." "Do you think they'd come back here?" Tessa asked, fear evident in her voice. Mackenzie considered the question carefully. "Possibly, not for the land now, but for revenge, or simply because they're desperate and know the territory." He met her worried gaze steadily. "We'll be vigilant. I won't let anything happen to you or Samuel." For the next several weeks, they maintained a cautious routine. Samuel was not allowed to wander the property alone, and Mackenzie kept his rifle close at hand while working the fields. Tessa found herself starting at unexpected sounds, the peaceful security of their home temporarily shadowed by threat. August brought sweltering heat and the first substantial harvest from their garden. Despite the lingering concern about the Thompson men, they couldn't help but feel pride in what they'd accomplished together. "We'll have enough to preserve for winter," Tessa observed as they gathered tomatoes one morning, "and perhaps some to sell in town." Mackenzie wiped sweat from his brow, surveying their thriving crops. "Next year will be even better. We could add another acre of wheat if we clear that section near the creek." The sound of an approaching horse interrupted their planning. Mackenzie straightened, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle he kept nearby. "Stay here," he instructed Tessa, moving to intercept the visitor. Relief washed over him when he recognized Marshal Davis riding alone toward the cabin. The lawman dismounted, his expression serious but not alarming. Mr. O'Connor, he greeted Mackenzie. Good news. We apprehended the rustlers 2 days ago near the Wyoming border. All three, Mackenzie asked. The marshal nodded. The leader and one son. The other was killed resisting arrest. He studied Mackenzie's face. You don't seem surprised. We had our suspicions about who they might be, Mackenzie admitted. Harold Thompson and his sons paid us an unwelcome visit last fall, making threats when Tessa refused to sell the homestead. Understanding dawned in the marshal's eyes. That explains a few things. Thompson had a map with this property marked. We thought it might be their next target. He shook his head. Family disputes are often the ugliest. Well, they'll face trial in Cheyenne. With the evidence we have, they'll likely hang or spend the rest of their lives in prison. After the marshal departed, Mackenzie shared the news with Tessa. She received it with mixed emotions, relief that the threat was eliminated, but sadness for the bitter path her uncle had chosen. I can't help thinking about my father, she said that evening as they sat on the porch. How different his life was from his brother's, though they started in the same place. Your father chose family and legacy over easy money, Mackenzie observed. Harold chose greed. The paths led to very different ends. She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I'm grateful every day that Samuel found you, that you chose to help us to stay. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Best decision I ever made. As summer faded into autumn, their life settled into a rhythm of productive work and domestic contentment. Mackenzie expanded the main cabin, adding a proper bedroom for Samuel and enlarging the kitchen where Tessa spent hours preserving their harvest for winter. In October, as the first frost silvered the grass and painted the distant hills with autumn colors, Tessa shared news that added another layer of joy to their already full life. Are you sure? Mackenzie asked, his eyes wide with wonder as they stood in the garden, the day's last light gilding her face. She nodded, hands resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The baby should come in late spring. May, perhaps. He gathered her into his arms, emotion too great for words momentarily overwhelming him. When he finally spoke, his voice was husky with feeling. I never thought I'd have this, a wife, children, a home. After the war, I convinced myself I didn't deserve such happiness. And now. She prompted gently. He smiled, touching her cheek with reverent fingers. Now I know that happiness isn't about deserving, it's about accepting what life offers with an open heart. He glanced toward the cabin where Samuel was completing his evening chores. Should we tell him? Not yet, Tessa decided. Let's wait until Christmas. It will be a special gift for him. The months passed in a blur of preparation, not just for winter, but for the new life that would join their family in the spring. Mackenzie built a cradle in the evenings, carving intricate designs into the headboard while Tessa worked on tiny garments by lamplight. Samuel, once told of the impending arrival, vacillated between excitement and concern, peppering them with questions about how a baby would change their family. Will you love the baby more than me? He asked one evening, vulnerability plain in his young face. Never, Tessa assured him, drawing him close. Our hearts don't divide when we love more people, Samuel. They grow. Besides, Mackenzie added, you'll always be special. You're the one who found me, who brought me home to your sister. Without you, none of this would have happened. This seemed to satisfy the boy, who threw himself enthusiastically into the role of brother-to-be, offering suggestions for names and making plans for what he would teach the baby once it was old enough. Winter came again, harsher than the previous year, but finding them better prepared. The expanded cabin stayed warm and snug despite howling winds, and their well-stocked larder meant they ate well, even when snow made travel to town impossible. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after their first kiss, Mackenzie presented Tessa with a locket to match the one he'd given her the previous year. For the baby, he explained as she opened it. I thought we could put a picture inside once he or she arrives. Tears glistened in her eyes as she thanked him. Pregnancy had softened her features, adding a luminous quality to her beauty that took Mackenzie's breath away. I have something for you too, she said, handing him a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, he found a journal bound in soft leather, the pages blank except for an inscription on the first page in Tessa's neat handwriting. For Mackenzie to record our family's story, which began when a boy asked for help and a good man answered. Emotion tightened his throat as he traced the words with his finger. "This is perfect," he managed finally. "Thank you." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Mackenzie felt the baby move for the first time, a flutter beneath his palm as it rested on Tessa's growing belly. "Hello there, little one," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "We're waiting for you." Tessa covered his hand with hers. "Do you ever think about how many coincidences had to align for us to be here now if Samuel hadn't found you specifically that day?" "I don't believe it was coincidence," Mackenzie said softly. "Not entirely. I think some things are meant to be, even if we take winding paths to reach them." Spring came early that year, the snow melting by mid-March to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the dark earth. Tessa's time grew closer, her movements slowing as the baby grew, but her spirits remained high. "I've never seen you more beautiful," Mackenzie told her one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. She laughed, patting her rounded belly. "I'm as big as a house." "Perfect," he insisted, kissing her temple. "Absolutely perfect," May brought warm days and the sweet scent of wildflowers blooming across the hills. Tessa's labor began on a clear morning as dawn broke over the eastern horizon. Mackenzie sent Samuel to fetch Mrs. Peterson, who had agreed to help with the birth, then returned to Tessa's side, holding her hand through the early contractions. "I'm scared," she admitted during a brief respite from pain. "I know," he soothed, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "But you're the strongest person I've ever known, Tessa O'Connor. You can do this." She smiled weakly at the use of her married name, drawing strength from his confidence. "Stay with me. Wild horses couldn't drag me away," he promised. The labor progressed steadily throughout the day. Mrs. Peterson arrived with her daughter, bringing experience and calm reassurance to the birthing room. Mackenzie stayed as long as propriety allowed, reluctantly withdrawing to the kitchen when the final stage approached. There he found Samuel sitting at the table, his face solemn with worry. "Is Tessa going to be all right?" the boy asked. Mackenzie sat beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Your sister is the strongest woman in Montana territory," he said with conviction, "and Mrs. Peterson knows what she's doing." Samuel nodded, though concern still creased his young brow. "Ma died having a baby," he said quietly. "Before I was born, Pa told me once. The baby died too." Understanding dawned in Mackenzie's mind. No wonder Samuel had been so anxious these past weeks. "That happens sometimes," he acknowledged gently, "but it's rare and your sister is healthy and strong." From the bedroom came a cry of pain, followed by Mrs. Peterson's encouraging voice. Samuel's hand found Mackenzie's, holding tight. "Why don't we go outside for a bit?" Mackenzie suggested, knowing the sounds of labor would only increase the boy's anxiety. "The barn needs checking, and fresh air will do us good." They spent the next hour tending to chores, Mackenzie keeping Samuel occupied with stories and small tasks that required concentration. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, Mrs. Peterson's daughter appeared at the barn door. "Mr. O'Connor," she called, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a daughter?" Relief and joy surged through Mackenzie as he rushed toward the cabin, Samuel close on his heels. In the bedroom, they found Tessa propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," she invited as Mackenzie approached reverently. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, emotion choking him as Tessa placed the newborn in his arms. The baby was tiny, perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and skin still flushed from birth. As he watched, she opened her eyes newborn blue, but with a hint of the green they might become, and seemed to look directly at him. "Hello, Margaret," he whispered, using the name they'd chosen to honor his mother. "I'm your father." Samuel crept closer, peering at the baby with cautious curiosity. "She's so small," he observed, "but she'll grow," Tessa assured him, "and she'll need her big brother to teach her everything." Pride straightened Samuel's shoulders at these words. Carefully, he reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand. Margaret's fingers reflexively curled around his, creating an instant bond that brought tears to Tessa's eyes. "She likes you," Mackenzie told the boy. "She knows your family." That night, after Samuel had gone to bed and Mrs. Peterson had departed with promises to return the next day, Mackenzie sat beside Tessa's bed, watching over his wife and daughter as they slept. Exhaustion pulled at him after the long, emotional day, but he couldn't bring himself to close his eyes, too filled with wonder at the sight before him. Tessa stirred, opening her eyes to find him watching. "You should rest," she murmured. "I will," he promised. "I just want to look at you both a little longer." He reached out to touch Margaret's tiny hand where it rested against Tessa's chest. "I can't believe she's really here, that any of this is real," Tessa smiled, understanding in her eyes. "It's real, Mackenzie, all of it." He leaned forward to kiss her gently, then pressed his lips to his daughter's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." As spring blossomed into summer, Margaret thrived, growing stronger each day. Mackenzie found himself constantly amazed by the perfect tiny fingernails, the way her face lit with recognition when he entered a room, the strength of her grip when she clutched his finger. Samuel proved to be an attentive and protective brother, proudly helping with simple baby tasks and regaling Margaret with stories she was far too young to understand, but seemed to enjoy nonetheless. Neighbors and friends from Miles City came to visit the new addition, bringing gifts and congratulations. Even Mrs. Holloway made the journey from town, pronouncing Margaret a fine, healthy girl with an approving nod that Tessa treasured. Life settled into a new rhythm, centered around Margaret's needs, but continuing the work that sustained their homestead. Mackenzie completed the spring planting with help from neighboring farmers who offered their labor in exchange for similar assistance when needed. The sense of community that had begun forming after their wedding strengthened further with Margaret's arrival, as if the baby represented hope and continuity for all of them. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Margaret asleep in Tessa's arms and Samuel playing with the farm dog nearby, Mackenzie reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "2 years ago," he said, "I was alone, drifting without purpose, convinced that was all life had in store for me." Tessa leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "And now?" He smiled, looking out over their land, the thriving crops, the expanded barn, the new fence enclosing what would soon be an orchard. Then his gaze returned to his family, Samuel, growing tall and strong, Margaret peacefully sleeping, and Tessa, the heart of everything. "Now I understand what I was really searching for all those years on the road," he said. "Not escape, but belonging, a place and people to call my own." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I found it the day a brave little boy tugged on my sleeve and asked if I could help his sister." "We found each other," Tessa corrected softly. "And we all saved each other." As the last light faded from the sky, stars beginning to appear in the gathering dusk, Mackenzie O'Connor held his family close and knew with absolute certainty that he had finally come home.